we're back. You guys won't know this because there won't be an interruption. Chris and I had a couple weeks off for some good family stuff that happened, and we are back after 2 weeks.
I didn't like it.
Of not recording.
I did not like it.
Not good at all.
Be thankful that you guys did not have to wait 2 weeks between this.
Yeah.
But, well, shit, I was going to say worth the wait. Well, you guys didn't have to wait, so lucky you. You still get an excellent episode getting ready to come out. And for those of you that are joining us on, for your first time, welcome. Most of you, welcome back. I'm Chris. Adam.
Hello.
We're going to be your professors for this little learning session. And on this show, we like to take a look at historical topics, pretty much just any historical topic. We're pretty broad. And we like to, educate and offer our little opinions on it.
And I don't know if you pick up on this. The noises might tip you off, but we do it in a different way. It's not a drunk history. It's not necessarily a high history, but it is history while we are high.
Yes, that's true. Today, we will be talking about a little thing involving a Mr. Doolittle, not the doctor.
No Eddie Murphy?
No Eddie Murphy, and no Robert Downey Jr.
Probably was he in Dr. Doolittle?
Oh, they tried to reboot that shit.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, they're like, hey, get the guy that did Sherlock. Actually, I do enjoy the Sherlock movies, but oh yeah, no, did he do it? I don't know. We're getting off topic already.
Back on topic. Doolittle.
Yeah, we're talking the Doolittle Raid. And this is kind of one of those topics that, it's a World War II topic, surprise, surprise. Also, this is a learning episode where I get to go ahead and sit in front of the class. Adam's taking a seat in the front row and getting ready to both learn and ask questions from the everyman perspective.
I am every man. And every woman.
There you go. One of those events in World War II that occurred very early on as far as America's involvement in World War II, but at the time, a completely secret mission. The information on it didn't come out till I believe it was post-war, at least to the public, maybe even a little further than that. Had this thing not succeeded, I don't know if we would know about this.
It would have been buried.
It would have been buried because this occurs at a time when the morale of America is like at an all-time low. Like a string of it starts with Pearl Harbor and then a string of other defeats of lost territories. This was kind of like just a haymaker. This was like getting staggered, and then you're trying to throw one punch to try to, at least kind of knock your enemy back a little bit to give you some breathing room.
Well, in my perspective, hearing you that this is what you were going to do and kind of putting myself in where this is. In the United States, we went through the Great Depression, 1929 into the 30s. Mm-hmm. We build ourselves back up. We go into wartime mode. We start producing for the Allied side.
The Lend-Lease, yeah.
We are making those things happen over in the West.
What is that? The arsenal of democracy. That's during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, at the same time that we're doing that, there is this kerfuffle in Southeast Asia where Japan is coming down and they've already made their way into China. They are messing with the Chinese. Mm-hmm. They are working their way into Southeast Asia, into rubber reserves, into oil reserves.
Yeah.
And they're moving with a purpose. Yeah. And we're keeping an eye on it. There's sanctions going on and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how much daily news that's actually making back home.
That's the thing too, is looking at this, when we step back and look at something from this era, it's just kind of like, of course you're going to hear about when Pearl Harbor happens because that's going to be national news. That's going to be on every headline. But things that are going on in different countries, like you're not getting the news very often. You're maybe getting, family gathers around the radio in the evenings to listen to what's going on, overseas and whatnot. But yeah, most of the information on a more expedient level is all military.
We're talking about our allies. We're talking about the European theater over there fighting, gritting their teeth. So at this point in time, we just pulled ourselves out of the recession. There's children that grew up at this point in time that are becoming adults. Mm-hmm. And then we get Pearl Harbor happening.
Yeah.
So there's not a long enough span of time to really, like, you had, call it 10 years to get comfortable and be like, okay, the Great Depression was just a blip. That was a sad time. We got through it. We're back, baby. There's nothing that's going to stop us. And then all of a sudden, the next day in the paper, you see that we were bombed by Japan in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
It's like, no. We're just trying to produce here. We don't want to do this.
Yeah, knowing that we've kind of had one foot in the war pool in regards to providing equipment and all that kind of stuff. But now that in itself indicates to kind of the American public, like, now it's become real for us to where we're just not making the shit. Now we have to actually start providing like the manpower to do this. This thrusts us into this position that a lot of us really didn't want to be in until Pearl Harbor happens, and then completely public opinion turns the other way, and it's like, okay, we're going at this now.
It made the war real.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we get into it too deep, remember, rate us wherever you guys go ahead and listen to your podcast. Given those 5-star reviews and everything, it's a small, thing for you guys to do to click that little 5th star, but it actually does, a great deal for us. So, yeah, please keep that up.
You're crushing it. We are over 1,000 reviews on Spotify. If I knew how to get into the Apple app to figure that out, it would
tricky.
Be great to see. But thank you for what you're doing. If you haven't done it yet, thank you in advance for when you go do it. We appreciate it. Let's talk about the Doolittle Raid.
Okay, so April 18th, 1942, 4.5 months after Pearl Harbor, 16 B-25 Mitchells, medium bombers, are sitting on the deck of the Hornet, USS Hornet. I think the newest U.S. aircraft carrier at this point.
Wasn't in Pearl Harbor.
Huh?
Wasn't in Pearl Harbor.
No.
Okay.
This thing, and I'll kind of get to it, this thing's first, voyage mission is this.
Ooh.
And that can kind of already tell you how important this was for the United States to commit those types of resources at a time when we really didn't have those resources to commit. Jumping back a little bit, just to go ahead and kind of give an overview of Pearl Harbor for those of you that haven't listened to the episode or anything. December 7th, 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers launch in 2 waves, 353 planes, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters. The attack at 7:48 a.m. in Honolulu at the Pearl Harbor naval base results in 4 battleships sunk, 4 battleships damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, 159 damaged, over 2,400 killed during this attack. And this is at a time when your battleships are kind of the proven kind of dogs in your fight for the Navy. That's how warfare has worked up to that point.
Naval doctrine.
Exactly.
Unquote.
The bigger, you want to get the biggest fucking guns out on the water to sink the other ship with the big guns.
Made sense at that time.
It did. So 8 of our battleships have been knocked out, which drastically reduces the effectiveness of the United States Navy in order to project power in the Pacific. Pretty much means that Japan kind of gets to do whatever they want to do until we can replace that, which in the case of these ships, like battleships, 3 to 4 years was the time frame that it would take to put these together. I don't know if any of our listeners have ever been on one of the museum tours that you can go to the ships and they convert, some of the battleships to museums.
Mm-hmm.
You underestimate just the technical aspects and how massive the undertaking is until you step on that and you're like, oh, we're on water, but this thing isn't moving at all. That's how much weight there is to it. And so as we're weakened in the Pacific, basically the morale back home is panic, Like, is the west coast of the United States next for this invasion? I mean, we didn't expect them. It was a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. Like, are they just going to keep coming all the way across the Pacific? And so you have all of this mobilization of these different units along the west coast. You start having like the Army. And at this point, you had like the Naval Air Corps, which was like fighters and torpedo bombers and dive bombers that operated exclusively off aircraft carriers and things like that. You then had the Army Air Corps, which was all of your bombers. And so these guys really didn't intermingle.
World War II question. Was there ever really a threat on the East Coast that we were going to be attacked by Germany?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, there was actually, I think, a U-boat sunk off the East Coast.
Really?
Yeah.
So you think when the people on the East Coast saw the West Coast get bombed, they're like, not us. We thought it could be us, but they got it first.
Yeah, and I think with the whole thing about the U-boats on the East Coast, that was something that got kept under wraps for the longest time. No one in the public was ever aware of that kind of stuff. It would have caused mass panic, yes. Exactly, with especially the fishing industry and all that kind of stuff going out there. And the only saving grace is that Pearl Harbor was far enough away that they could be like, well, logistically, they didn't take Pearl Harbor. That's not a place where they can, reinforce, resupply, and then try to attack the West Coast. That's still under our control. They'd still have to come all the way over from Japan, so it's not really feasible.
Yeah, it's just, I completely misunderstand a map and like the size of oceans. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that where everything's located. But the Pacific Ocean and where Hawaii is and where Japan is, it has to be like 5 times the size of the Atlantic Ocean between us and Europe.
It feels like it. When you
so
look at
much
that,
bigger, it feels like.
And kind of like you were saying, when you look at a map, for some reason, when you think of Hawaii, you always think off of our west coast, like in line with San Francisco or something, like just right in the middle. Reality, it's like Cabo is where it's actually level with, down in Baja in Mexico. Japan is more like up toward Oregon and Washington in that area, which is why you also get that climate in Japan as well.
Yeah.
Japan is right across from the Koreas. It's actually, China is pretty decently like southwest of Japan. It's not right across from it.
Yeah, which, like you say, climate-wise definitely makes sense. But the curvature of the Earth, this is a big one that I just Googled. The Pacific Ocean covers roughly 46% of the Earth's water surface, while the Atlantic is only 20%.
Jesus.
So,
I guess you don't really notice that because when you're looking at it, you're looking at the widest point, which is between like the United States and Europe, kind of.
Yeah.
But then you go down and you're like, oh shit, South America and Africa are actually pretty decently close for that gap.
Yeah, it's Pangea.
Yeah, exactly.
They hadn't separated.
They used to fit together.
Well, and then when you look at a flat world map, there's water on the left side of the map and there's water on the right side of the map. It's all the same water. We just had to flatten it out.
Exactly. So December 21st, 1941 rolls around, and FDR basically tells the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's like, we need to figure out how to bomb Japan ASAP. We need to go ahead and show them that they're not invulnerable. We need to give the American publics a victory.
Yeah.
Something to show that we're actually going to hit them. They hit us at Pearl Harbor. We're going to go ahead and hit them where they live. We need this big, bold thing to try to go ahead and kind of rally the public, try to kind of turn the tide and give this not a material blow to Japan, but just like fuck them psychologically, basically to let them know like, hey, we can get to you.
They hit an island way off the coast of our country.
Yeah.
If we go after Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the rub on that is that during the Pearl Harbor attack, that was part of a larger operation that involved I want to say like the Philippines. And that was actually, there were attacks all over like would it be Southeast Asia?
Pearl Harbor was kind of like the misdirection.
It wasn't so much the misdirection, I don't think. It was basically the way to stop any meaningful response from responding to anything else in those American-held or Allied-held territories.
It cuts off the jumping-off point. That makes sense.
Exactly. You take out America's ability to respond by taking out the battleships. They can't come and help their allies over here. We're going to have so much more of a head start on them. By the time they can respond, we're going to be fortified and dug in. So FDR we need to go ahead and bomb them. Well, January rolls around and the losses keep coming for the States. So basically, Japan takes Manila on January 2nd of 1942, and then on January 12th, they invade Burma. So any of these areas that we would have had the availability to actually be close enough for land-based aircraft to bomb Japan is gone. It's off the table. So you have to now find a way. You can't get Navy fighters there because they just simply don't have the fuel capacity.
Hey, range is limited.
And not only that, even if they didn't have, or even if they did have the fuel capacity, you're sending them with one little bomb. Like you're not, you have to make a statement in regards to this. And so trying to come up with, these different ideas, this guy, Captain Francis Lowe, who was the assistant chief of staff for like the anti-submarine warfare division for the Navy, he basically tells this Admiral Ernest King, who was at the time the second most senior naval guy. I think the first guy was actually William Leahy, who was the chief of staff to the president. So he was the main guy. So Lowe basically tells him, he's like, hey, I'd actually seen down where I was in Norfolk, I've actually seen they've been doing training this time. All these bombers have been training and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We know we're not involved, at this point, now we're involved in the war, but even before then, we were gearing up for it. We weren't waiting for, it to be declared. We want to be running by the time war is declared. We don't want to have to just start from scratch at that point.
No green pilots. Everybody's going to be seasoned. They're not battle tested, but they are seasoned.
And with Norfolk being kind of a main hub, there was a naval station there.
In Virginia?
Yes.
Okay.
So not only was there a ton of ship manufacturing there, also because of the ship manufacturing, there was a naval presence so they could, refit, reload planes, things like that. So the naval pilots would be training on these airfields, and there was an outline of the flight deck of a carrier. And he had noticed, I think, some bomber pilots kind of fucking around a little bit and seeing if they could get their bombers off the ground in the range of the flight deck that these fighter pilots were able to take off. So he had seen this, and he mentions to Admiral King, he's like, I think they can actually get some of these medium bombers off the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. If that's the case, that allows us to get much closer to Japan and launch, a reasonable amount of bombers to actually go after different targets to make more of a statement. And being in kind of like, hey, we're looking for any ideas on how we can make this possible. He's like, yeah, go with it, see what you can develop, and then kind of get back to us to even find out if this is feasible. So he goes to this guy, Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle. He goes by Jimmy Doolittle. You got to respect a guy that's rocking Jimmy
JD, yeah.
into his 40s. And Jimmy Doolittle is coming into this. I had a pretty significant knowledge of like the Doolittle Raid and everything, but I didn't know a lot about Jimmy Doolittle. And apparently not because of this raid, but because of other contributions to essentially just the field of aeronautics, he's one of the most famous pilots in the United States, or was one of the most famous pilots in the United States.
Was at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
At the time. So he actually was born, I'm trying to remember, he might have been born in California, but he lived and grew up in Nome, Alaska. He was born December 14th, 1896. I know you love it when we go back and discuss an 1800s birthday.
What the hell?
Yep. And went to UC Berkeley, graduated in 1922. Prior to that, going to Berkeley, he had served as a flight instructor during World War I. So this was at a time when these guys were training on, biplanes and everything. And first person to actually make a one-day crossing of the continental United States.
Okay.
So kind of a big deal. And he
Not
did
quite
that.
Limburg, but pretty big deal.
Pretty big deal. And he did it in a World War I biplane. He had to land, of course, to refuel and everything, but it was done in one day to show oh my God, the country is now open within a day with aviation. Huh. He was awarded in 1925. And when I say awarded, I don't mean the honorary award. He earned the first doctorate in aeronautical engineering from M.I.T. And it was the first doctorate of that nature. 1929, this guy pioneered the use of what's called blind flying. That's when essentially you rely on nothing but your instrumentation in order to go ahead and fly. And how he demonstrated this, he went and got a plane, he blacked out all of the windows, lined himself up on the runway, took off, flew a large loop around the airfield, and landed the plane without having any visual reference, simply flying by his gauges, altimeters, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, that makes more sense, because I was going to say they couldn't have had a whole lot of radio frequency back then with planes, right?
You would have like homing beacons and like radio signals and stuff like that, but
as far the tower can't be like, all right, turning right at this speed.
No, I think it was a demonstration of like, I'm just running off these instruments.
Trusting,
I'm not running.
Yeah,
yep, exactly.
Okay,
which is nuts, man. 1929. It's like how technical and accurate can those things be? So he had a reputation of kind of this, dare I say, a Renaissance man of aeronautical study. He was also a racing pilot and had set several records for racing airplanes and everything. So, I mean, he's insanely smart when it comes to this kind of stuff. But they were doing an interview in one of the documentaries I was watching, and they said that he was not really like a wild man or anything like that, but that he was extremely calculating about the risks that he was taking. So when he's up there doing like air racing and everything, it's not that he's being reckless or anything. He's like, I've calculated all of the factors and I know that this will work in this manner. So he was very surgical about how he put everything together, which is why this guy pulls him in to actually plan this raid. He had previously been in the Army Air Force back in World War I when he was an instructor. He left, went to go operate in the private sector. He worked for Shell Oil as a pilot. And he was, I'm trying to think of like in what capacity, but he flew for Shell Oil. He actually went over to Germany at one point when the Nazis were in power and kind of saw the way that it was leaning. He was talking to German pilots and like, he's like, everything they're saying says they're going to actually go to war here in Europe, despite what everyone else is hearing. Like, I'm talking to these guys, and the buzz is that these guys are. He ends up getting back. He's talking to someone else in the military, one of the more senior commanders, and I think it was 10 days later the Nazis invaded Poland.
He should have put some money on it.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Sorry, got
it. To me, the whole idea of like that being his professional job and what he's doing flying and then going off and that's like what your passion is to do in your spare time feels like a guy who just wants to soak up every single second of time in the air and understanding wind pressures and speeds and all of that kind of different stuff.
Yeah.
That's the guy that you want to lead something like this.
Well, and at this point, he was just planning this. They're just like, Jimmy, make this shit happen. So they pull in Doolittle. He has 66 days from the time that they bring him in to actually get this thing going. And it was either the day or the day after they brought him in, they're like, you're going to be the guy that plans this. I think he was like 44 when he came back in. He was a major when they brought him back in, I think. And they were like, oh, and because you're going to need to be getting around to all these airfields and all these locations, here's a P-30 Warhawk for your personal use.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah. I'm sure the thing wasn't armed because he's flying over the states.
No,
but because he was such an experienced pilot and everything, they're just like, yeah, take one of the fucking fighter planes and just fly it around to wherever you're going to need to. We don't want to have to worry about booking your flights. You can handle this. And so he just has this P-40 Warhawk that he's flying around like a government car.
And he's probably landing at bases, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when there's a P-40 Warhawk that shows up and everybody that's working on the runway is like, oh, it's Jimmy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jimmy's pulling up. So
it's like a Seinfeld episode. Jimmy's pulling up.
So one of the first things he has to do is they're like, do we even have the equipment available? We don't have the time to develop something to go ahead and do this. We have to use what we have available and find a way to fit that to what this mission is going to require.
So he's cleaning out the cupboard of sorts to put this together.
Not so much cleaning out the cupboard, more so he's trying to look for something existing that can be retrofitted in a way that actually works for what they require.
Okay.
So couple of the guys that are like also in on this mission, more the senior guys, Jimmy's kind of making his own notes and kind of doing his own research. They're doing their research about what planes they have available. They look into a few different planes. They're having to factor in bomb payload that they're able to take with them, fuel capacity, range, speed, size of the plane, because it's going to be taken off an aircraft carrier. Space is at a premium. Mm-hmm. The bigger the plane, the less of them you're able to send off. The heavier the plane, the longer runway it takes. So after going through a few different planes, they actually end up deciding on the B-25 Mitchell. And a couple of the other planes that they had kind of looked at, drawbacks on that were usually wingspan on one of them was like 50% larger, so it would have clipped the island on the aircraft carrier. And then another one of the planes, I think, didn't have quite the range that the B-25 had. So just off the assembly line, B-25s that are being made, I think they have a range of about 1,300 miles.
Feels like a lot.
It feels like a lot until you find out that the cruising range that these planes are going to require for this mission, if they were able to get close as they want to Japan, is going to be 2,400 miles, nautical miles.
Yeah, that's...
Which, did you know that a nautical mile and a standard mile that we're used to are different?
5,280 for a standard mile. Nautical mile is...
God damn it, I hate that you know this. It's 15% longer than a standard mile.
Oh, I was going to go shorter. Okay.
Yeah, it's 15% longer than a standard mile. So they need
hell does that? Why?
It's something about the nautical miles go from like longitude to longitude, so like 45th degree to 46th degree, and it's a different form of measurement, I guess.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't go that deep. I just wanted to find out the difference.
That's nuts.
The planes also needed to have the capacity for a 2,000-pound bomb load. They were going to use three 500-pound bomb like explosives, and then one of them was going to be incendiaries to start fires.
In a wooden city?
Tokyo was going to be one of their targets. So they got the plane figured out. Jimmy comes to this conclusion, B-25s are going to work. The other guys come to the same conclusion. They're like, perfect, we're all on the same page for this. So Jimmy ends up, I think, requisitioning, like that same day, he ends up taking off and flying somewhere in his P-40. Like, I think he flies to somewhere in Ohio, requisitions 24 of these B-24s, and is like, before I even start having anyone train on these things, because the crux of this is going to be, can these things even get off a carrier deck? If they cannot do that, there's no point in even doing this mission. So what we need to do is determine if this is even possible.
So let's go away from the water and go into the Midwest. Well, you got the lakes, I guess. Well,
it's kind of weird how this team gets put together and everything for this like insanely top secret mission. February 3rd of 1942. So this is when Doolittle's kind of planning and everything. Basically, these two guys, I can't remember their rank, but they go down to Norfolk and bring, I think, 3 B-25s with them. I don't think they're modified. I think they were just 3 standard B-25s.
So not what's rolling off the line.
No, what is rolling off the line? Like just standard rolling off the line B-25s. They go down there. The USS Hornet is the newest aircraft carrier. It had just been completed. And these guys go to the captain of the Hornet. His name was like Mitcher. And they're like, hey, we need to go ahead and see if this is even possible. We need to go ahead and put these Army bombers on the deck of this thing and try to take them off. So they're able to put them on there. They take off. Now, these are also not loaded with bombs. These are not fully loaded with fuel. They have enough fuel to fly around for a little bit.
Yeah.
But they're just at this point, if they can't show that it's going to take off of this deck, this mission is, but they have to pretty much do everything they can to try to make this look feasible.
Yeah.
And then they can figure out the particulars later.
Is Mitcher the one that takes the Hornet to the Pacific?
Yes. He's the captain.
He's seen it done. He knows that it's possible.
He knows it's possible, but he knows that the circumstances are also going to be different. This is 2 B-25s on the back of the Hornet.
Like their wheels are hanging off the edge.
Correct. The Hornet is out to sea because they need to try to simulate kind of real conditions. Yep. Well, when a ship is launching aircraft, let's say, there's a carrier fleet and it's heading west and it's trying to find another carrier fleet that's coming east. If they spot and they go to launch their aircraft, if the wind is going with them, a tailwind, they will purposely turn the ship, start heading back the other direction into the wind to launch planes because the planes can get off the deck. Because you're generating not only the speed of the aircraft carrier, but then the wind coming against you can essentially do almost half the work to get these planes up. So they're trying to simulate these conditions. These very light, non-loaded planes basically just almost lift off the deck. So they're powering up the engines and everything. They have the brakes on. They let go of the brakes. One of the planes starts taking off so quickly that the wing, which was supposed to run under part of the island superstructure, starts lifting off too early and they almost clip this thing. But they end up getting two of these B-25s, the only two that they were testing, off the deck. And they're like, fucking perfect. We're a go. This actually works.
But it's their first try. Yeah, it did work, but that level of error was...
Well, here's the thing, too. It worked, but these things don't have 2,000 pounds worth of bombs.
Yeah.
They don't have all of the additional fuel that's going to be required to make this trip. This was just simply to see if at the very rawest point of this mission, in the very basic stages, if it was even feasible to get these things off of the carrier deck, which now it was. Now, guess what? You have to figure out how to make it work with a shit ton of weight.
You just throw sandbags in the back and keep testing with that? Or could you not get enough sandbags to counteract that weight?
Well, so how they end up doing it, they let Doolittle know, hey, these things actually were able to take off. We're going with this plan. He sends the B-24s. He's like, I'm not sending them to the crews. I haven't even picked out the crews at this point, but he's like, I'm not going to have these guys fly planes that aren't going to be in the condition they're going to be in when they actually need to start taking these things off in training. So they end up sending the planes up to a place I'm trying to remember, it may be another place in Ohio. It was a modification facility that a commercial airliner had been using, but then had been kind of co-opted to then start going on war footing to start making war materials. And they go through this huge modification process in order to actually lighten these things up. They remove a lower gun turret. They install de-icers and anti-icers. They mount steel blast plates around the upper turret. So when we were talking about the bombers in Europe, and they have that turret that kind of sits back behind the pilot that has the plexiglass around it, and it can swivel all the way around to cover the top of the plane.
Yeah, not the ball turret at the bottom, but
the one up top.
Yeah.
So they installed some steel blast shielding around that to kind of protect that guy a little bit more. They remove what's considered called a liaison radio. It's the main radio that allows long-range communication because it was going to be radio silent during this entire mission. So, hey, we don't need that. They installed a 160-gallon, collapsible neoprene rubber auxiliary fuel tank that sat on top of the bomb bay structure. When they removed the lower turret, they replaced it with a 60-gallon fuel tank. They had to turn these things into flying gas cans.
Yeah.
Because the range that these things had, they almost needed to double the range for these things to even have a chance at making this mission.
Well, and if this is going to be a surprise mission, you're not necessarily as worried about the defenses because you're just going to have to be in and out as fast as possible before you can launch.
Exactly. Kind of speaking on that, one of the things they did is the rear tail gun, because they weren't going to be having a full crew that would normally crew a B-25. It was going to be down to 5 guys: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, and then an engineer/gunner who would run that top turret. So no one's even going to be in the rear of the plane. So they took, instead of putting that gun there with the weight, they simply just took broom handles, painted them black, and stuck them out the back.
Oh, decoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And apparently it worked, because during the mission, they said that even the few amounts of fighters that came up to try to intercept them never attacked from the rear.
Huh.
So yeah, I guess in hindsight that works.
Broom handles get a dub.
And that kind of reminds me too, because that's on that fucking shitty Michael Bay Pearl Harbor movie. They completely butcher the Doolittle Raid because they're like, let's just throw Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett's character in there as part of the Doolittle Raid and all this kind of shit. And then there's a point in the Midway movie where I think they do the Doolittle Raid as well, or show them actually launching off the carrier deck and everything. But yeah, there really hasn't been, that I've seen anyway, anything like for like TV or media done as far as this goes. But I always remember the scene when they're painting the broom handles black. They're like, they're taking out our tail guns. We're getting broom handles.
Chalamet's not old enough to do Doolittle.
Not yet.
Who would play Doolittle in the movie?
I didn't think about that. Don't put me on the spot like that. I can't think about it. Gary Oldman. He's too old at this point, but that's just who I'd go to for if I just need someone that I know can do justice to the role. It's Gary Oldman.
What about that Matt Wallace guy? Not the shitty political commentator, but the guy that's on like Veep.
Oh, I don't know if that's his wheelhouse.
Not Doolittle didn't have a horseshoe?
Nope, I don't think he would. Oh shit, he did.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe we're there.
Yeah, he did. The B-25s had that Norden bomb sight that we also kind of discussed during that European episode that was like really like it was a top secret thing, and if they were going to capture, they had to destroy it, and it made high level accurate bombing possible, or I do accurate in air quotes. They were going to be dropping their bombs from about 1,500 feet or below. The Norden was only effective at 4,000 feet or above.
Oh, good. So it...
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it did weigh a little bit too. So these guys that end up getting picked for this mission, it was the 17th Bombardment Group who they were chosen because they had the most experience and they were the first to receive the B-25s.
Makes
now,
sense.
The B-25s hadn't seen combat yet. They were rolling off the line and they were being developed in mass numbers, but they hadn't been on actual combat missions, but they were being trained with extensively. So this bombardment group is selected as kind of the pool in which they're going to pull from to get these eventual, I think it's 80 volunteers that are going to be going on this mission. They get these guys and they pull them. They're actually based in Pendleton, Oregon, which
Cool.
Pendleton is not close to the coast.
No.
And these guys were an anti-submarine patrol. So they were flying from Pendleton, Oregon, across the other half of Oregon out to the Pacific, and then combing the coast for Japanese submarines.
Does the Columbia go through Pendleton? Is it close? I thought that was more like Dalles Hood River.
I mean, you could get to the Columbia pretty easily and then fold it down, but are you getting it? Well, was that something they were worried about? I think it was just keeping that stuff contained further inland.
Okay.
To make sure it didn't get bombed if there was some type of invasion or something.
I guess also when you think about the thought of them getting out to the ocean to defend is also how much further they would have to come inland to attack.
It's 300 miles, though. That just seems weird. But again, these planes have a 1,300-mile range, and so 300 out, fly around for a little bit, 300 back.
Yeah.
So they take this 17th Bombardment Group, or at least portions of it, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and move you guys. You guys are transferring down to Columbia Army Air Base in South Carolina, but I'm only taking volunteers for this extremely hazardous mission. And there were, I want to say almost the entire group volunteered, and even their commander volunteered. So they're like, again, Pearl Harbor is, at this point when they're doing this stuff, Pearl Harbor was less than 2 months ago.
These guys are in. They're at an all-time high. This is Navajo code talker type. We saw what happened. We got punched in the eye. Let's go enlist.
This is like the guys that, the huge, what would you say, that all the guys that went to go sign up after Pearl Harbor, just that huge influx of people getting ready to sign up, for the Army. These guys had already signed up in anticipation of this, and they're like, they have no idea what the mission is. They know the mission is going to involve the B-24. They have no fucking clue what they're doing. They have no clue that they're going to be taking off of an aircraft carrier. This guy is just like, this is an extremely hazardous mission. I need volunteers. And they filled up the 80 spots no problem.
I'm sure once they heard that Doolittle was attached to it, that Jimmy was going to be there.
And I'm saying there was more than 80 of them because they actually lost a couple planes due to some mechanical failure, not during the mission, but during the training and everything. But those crews, some of those crews were kept as like backups in case somebody else had to drop out because they were doing the same training. So these guys end up going to Columbia, and then they're sent after they receive or have to go get the planes and pick them up. They're sent to this place called Elgin Air Force Base, which I think, or Elgin Field, which is in Florida. Doolittle basically was like, okay, I need a base that is out of the way, that is very private. I need it to have an auxiliary field that's not very visible to the public where we can do some testing and everything. And I need it to be near the water because I need to train these guys on over water navigation. So they end up picking this place in Florida. And this guy named Henry Miller, he was a lieutenant in the Navy. He was an instructor. He basically was someone who would train naval pilots on takeoff and landings on aircraft carriers. That was his specialty. And he's pulled in to basically train these guys. After they're brought down there, they're told, hey, not where we're going, not what we're doing, but the first part of what you guys need to do is you guys need to be able to take these planes off. I think they said in 500 feet.
Is that when it clicks? Like, is that when they realize what they're going to have to do?
I don't know.
Once you hear that and you see the guy that specifically teaches people how to take off of runways shows up, or take off of carriers.
My mind goes into the mode of like, okay, who's this guy? This guy trains naval pilots to take off aircraft carriers. We see these markings on the ground. Air Force. Yeah, we see these markings on the ground. This is at a time too when none of these guys, because there wasn't a lot of crossing between the different military factions, Navy, Army, things like that, that any of these guys would really have any experience with an aircraft carrier or having maybe even ever seen one, except maybe in a picture or a newsreel or something like that. But they know at this point that they've probably pieced it together that we need to get these planes off the ground within this time frame. And so they're trying to develop these different ways to do it, like how far do you need to rev the engines up? How much do you need to have the flaps down? They train for, I think, 3 weeks, just like rigorous training. Enough so to where 2 of the planes end up having some mechanical failure. One of them might have crashed a little bit. But through this time period, they're able to develop these methods in order to get these planes off the ground. Again, this is just static on the ground. They're not on an aircraft carrier where the wind's coming at them or anything like that. They're also not dealing with the up and down pitch of the ocean, but they're working on first getting these things off the ground, then starting to add weight to them, like the fuel and the bombs and everything, and trying to kind of work their way through from what is normally needed to actually have these planes take off. I want to say it's something in the neighborhood of like 1,200 feet that these things usually require for a minimum in order to take off. They're now being asked to do it in like 500, maybe just a shade under 500.
So less than half.
So in addition to being able to do these takeoffs on these, and notice how I haven't said landings, because they're not fucking landing on these aircraft carriers. It's not possible just for the simple weight of the aircraft, not from a standpoint of the carrier not being able to support it.
The inertia.
But the resting hooks on the back of it would literally rip the back right off the plane. Because it can slow a lighter fighter, but it can't do that to a bomber.
Just too much weight coming downhill. Yeah. Wow.
So the 2 planes are out. One of them ends up developing like a shimmy in the front wheel that can't be corrected. So that one's out as well. But over the course of those 3 weeks, they're being trained on low level and night flying, over water navigation. Miller, who was not technically one of the raiders, was actually there with them during the mission, not on the planes, but he went out on the ship with them. And he was brought in like as an honorary raider. And you'll kind of find out what that means once we kind of get toward the end of it.
Before we do that, for somebody that doesn't know what a shimmy is, not saying that I don't, but if the listeners...
I'm doing it right now where, you wiggle. It basically is a shake. Shimmy and shake. So like it would be like going and the wheel would be moving back and forth and they'd feel that shimmy in the wheel.
Okay.
Yeah. So
it's like a death wobble.
And again, they 24 planes. They're expecting to lose some of these.
Yeah.
They're not going to take anything that does not work to the exact specifications. And because Doolittle is, so just dialed in on this aeronautical engineering type thing, they're also going through these planes and changing around the engines and how they perform, because they're trying to squeeze, with a normal bombing raid, your range and everything like that, but you're not tweaking the carburetors to make the leanest mix of gas and calculating the exact speed you have to get maximum distance and paying so much attention to that. Whereas these planes get finely tuned like instruments to where the fuel consumption is just exactly this. The carburetors are exactly open like this. It may not look correct if someone else were to look at them, and that actually comes into play a little bit later, but they're designed exactly for the purpose of this mission.
Well, ideally, if you're launching from a carrier and you're coming back and landing on a carrier, you don't want to put the minimum amount so you're coming in with no fuel left.
Yeah, you don't want to come in with too much fuel, because if you have a crash landing and everything. But yeah, I mean, that stuff is carefully looked at. I think when you're flying as far as like a fighter goes, you're probably filling that thing up to try to make sure you can stay up in the air as long as possible for like, combat air patrol or things like that. Or if you're being sent against an enemy fleet, give them as much gas in case they have to search farther than you anticipated, or even like fight around a little bit where those, the enemy ships are located.
If you're not coming back and landing on a carrier, though, you're just trying to figure out enough to get you to wherever you need to land.
Yeah, just getting off this carrier is don't even have to worry about landing on this. March 25th, 42 rolls around, and the remaining 22 planes actually take off for a field outside of Sacramento.
Okay, so now we're on the West Coast.
Yep. So I want to say that Jimmy received a message when this mission was a go, and it was trying to be timed out. I think they wanted it originally to be on April 1st, which I don't know if it was an April Fool's Day type thing that they were trying to pull on the Japanese. Yeah.
Good move. I don't think they do April Fools, but
it ends up being pushed back a little bit. But at this point, the Hornet has started to make its way around and go through the Panama Canal, because it's got to be ready and waiting in San Francisco when they're actually ready to go. So it's heading that direction.
Just them, or is there anybody else coming from the East Coast?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it would have had an escort getting down to the Panama Canal, and then probably an escort on the other side of it or going through with it, because those things aren't going to be traveling by themselves just because they're so valuable.
But no other carriers?
No other carriers.
Okay.
Just the Hornet going through.
Gotcha.
So while they're in Sacramento, it's supposed to be going through inspections to make sure that during the flight there, nothing got thrown off. Any final modifications that they didn't have time to make, in Florida, they do some additional training, I think, for like 5 of the crews that were just trying to get really, really dialed in. But one of the planes, because they were being worked on not by military engineers or mechanics, but by civilian mechanics, there was an incident where one of the planes, the guy was looking over the engine, inspecting. He's like, the carburetors are all kinds of fucked. Like these things, you guys have messed these things up. He goes and he basically just like sets them to where they are for their regular standard requirements for the B-25. So it's going to be burning more gas. It's going to get less mileage, and that's going to come into play for one of these groups, for one of the planes. Oh, no. March 31st, 42. The 16 final B-25s. So they're going through all of them. Doolittle also went through the exact same training that the pilots went through to make sure
he did.
But again, he's just planning the mission. He's not supposed to go. The guy that is his immediate superior in this, he is like, Jimmy, I got to have you here. I got to keep you on my staff. He's like, I want to go. He's like, I've trained. He's like, I've designed this mission. He's like, if anyone is going to be taking the risk for this mission, he's like, I need to be part of it. He's like, I can't afford to lose you. He's like, here, I'll make you a deal. Go ask the general, the guy that's above him, if it's okay with him, it's okay with me. He goes and he pokes his head in the door, and he's like, hey, is it okay if I go on this mission? He's like, if it's okay with your commanding officer, it's okay with me. All of a sudden you hear his intercom go off, and he's like, I just told him he could go. So he's like, fuck yeah, I get to go. Well, the planes already have their crews. And one of the pilots had to drop out for being sick. And so the other crew was waiting for someone to fill in. And he's talking to one of the guys that was part of the crew, one of the captains or, pilots. He was in charge of I'm not requisitions. I'm trying to think. He was kind of their admin that would like handle like reassignments of like positions and stuff. And he's like, well, the old man is coming in. Maybe, he can work something out, or he can, step in. The guy's like, the old man. He's like, I never heard anyone like not refer to a commanding officer by their actual name. He's like, the old man showed up and it was Jimmy Doolittle. And we were like, oh yeah, he can totally pilot the plane.
It sucks and it doesn't suck, because if a spot opens up and you're sitting on the alternate crew, and you're like, yeah, I get to go do this. Because again, like you're saying, patriotism and wanting to go do this has to be at an all-time high. I'm sure those guys are just built different with the way that they work. So now that they know the challenge and what they have to do, that has to amp them up even more to be able to go back after they're done and talk to their buddies on base and be like, yo, guess what I did?
Yeah.
And then the one guy that you just probably can't put up a fuss about shows up to take that spot instead.
Yeah. The guy that you'd been seeing show up and do all the training that you couldn't be too surprised though.
Yeah. No, if it was going to be anybody, the old man, everybody probably had
You'd be
know.
comfortable with that guy stepping into the seat. And, because security was such a huge thing, before they even left Florida, they had to get rid of a few crews because the planes that they were flying and everything, they're like, go ahead and, you guys are going to be heading back to South Carolina. Do not say a word about this to anybody. The safety of the guys that are still going on this mission, your friends, it could completely put them in jeopardy. So they end up getting over to, then Sacramento, then Alameda. When they're landing in Alameda, which is basically the Air Force base that's in San Francisco Bay, they land and they taxi the planes basically up to the docks. Fucking crane comes and hooks up 3 lines to the top of the B-25 and just hoists it onto the deck. One of the guys, and I think they had to have a guy in each plane, at least one, because once the plane hit the deck, he had to engage the brakes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And his joke was, he's like, here's the deal. He's like, I never walked on to the Hornet. And he's like, and I never walked off of the Hornet either. He's like, I never walked onto that carrier and I never walked off of that carrier. I thought that was kind of funny. So
hell yeah. You're the only guy that gets to say that.
So out of these 16 B-25s and the crews that are selected for this mission, any of the extra guys that weren't part of this final 16 were also brought on both for security and also as alternates to fill in any of these spots that they needed. They said because they had more planes than the 16 when they originally brought them down there, they found out that the flight deck could only actually hold 16 while still leaving enough room to actually be able to take off.
Okay, so that's good to know now.
That's good to know now. So and they said as they're taxiing up, Doolittle's standing there and he's, getting their attention to open the window and he's like, anything feel off on this plane? Anything at all? And he's like, left engine was running a little rough. He's like, perfect. I need to get rid of 4 planes anyway. So that one's out. So they were able to kind of like whittle it down and get rid of 4 of them just based on maybe little difficulties that they were having. So he got the cream. He was making sure he got the cream of the crop on that. 15 of them are supposed to be for the mission. One of them was there to actually show the crews that could actually be done because no one aside from those 2 original guys had ever taken off of an aircraft carrier. So they wanted to basically be like, okay, we know this is batshit insane. You guys know that we're taking off of an aircraft carrier, but you have not seen it done. You've seen people take off before the line hit on the strip on the ground. But,
just a line.
But we want to show you so you actually have some confidence that when it comes time for mission go, that everyone's like, oh yeah, this can be done.
Were they landing back at the base in Alameda?
The one that was supposed to do it, they added it to the mission. They never launched it. They're just like, we're doing 16.
So they never had proof?
Nope. The first time they saw it happen was the plane the first plane doing it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So they end up loading these things up, and a few of the pilots, it's crazy because like the last Doolittle Raider didn't die until 2019. He was 103.
That's pretty good.
Some of these guys lasted a long time, so they were able to do interviews with him and everything. And they were talking about, okay, we had seen the length of the deck on the actual like tarmac and where we were landing. But as they kept putting these planes on the flight deck, the deck kept getting shorter and shorter. And some of us started to get a little bit worried because the room that we needed to take off was being occupied by these other planes. Yeah. With an aircraft carrier, normally you could keep planes on the flight deck and everything, but you would also be keeping a lot of planes down below in the hangar deck. These B-25s were too big to do that.
Oh, shit.
They were all strapped and lashed down to the back of the flight deck. And because they were on there, the carrier didn't have any fighters that it could use. They were all down in the hangar. So the plan was to, once they were getting ready to leave, and I want to say in total, the guys that ended up taking off were 80 crew members, maintenance guys that had been working on these planes and everything, totaled 71 officers and 130 enlisted men between the crew and then also the maintenance guys that were going on this mission. As far as the planes could defending themselves, I probably should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but to actually defend themselves, the planes were left with some of their guns. Mm-hmm. So they still had that turret up top, and then they had 130 caliber nose gun. That's it though, as far as defense. They weren't planning on needing to actually do any fighting. It was going to be get in there and get the fuck out as quickly as possible. So they're all loaded up, broad daylight as well. And this thing steams out of San Francisco Bay, goes under the Golden Gate Bridge with these 16 bombers on the deck. And it's probably not that weird of a sight because that's how they got planes to certain places that they couldn't fly to. So if Hawaii, which had just been bombed and lost a bunch of its planes, people were just like, oh, they're just transporting them to Hawaii. These bombers are just going to be unloaded in Hawaii and they're just going to use them from there. So there wasn't really, even though it was in broad daylight, it wasn't really outside the norm to have stuff like this on a deck. Taking off, never been done before, but just having them on the flight deck had been something that was seen before.
But do you think even regular eyes, looking out, could tell that they were bigger planes than would usually come off the deck?
I mean, if you're in that area, and you're used to all the naval presence and seeing carriers go out with different planes and everything, you could probably look at that and say, those planes are do those planes have two engines on them? I'm sure that a
so
trained eye
defining.
Yeah.
Factors.
The old weird guy that would go out there and just watch the ships go by. We're like, oh, those are bombers. Yeah.
He runs back into town and he's screaming, they're taking bombers out.
Yeah. So the day before they're getting ready to steam out, actually, Doolittle's like, hey, go actually have an evening on the town and everything to the guys that were actually going to be going on the raid.
Might be your last one.
That's kind of what I think they were getting at. And he ends up going out to dinner with his wife, but then ends up meeting and having a meeting with, not unexpectedly, they were arranged to meet, Admiral Halsey. And Halsey is going to be the guy that's in charge because Doolittle is just in charge of the mission. He's not the commander of this aircraft carrier's on. That's the captain's job. And then he's also not the admiral in charge of the fleet itself. So Halsey is actually going to be the guy that's in charge of everything. His ship, I think, is the Enterprise. He is stationed in Hawaii and flew back just to have this meeting with Doolittle about this to kind of hash out the details of it. So the details essentially of the mission before we actually get to the launch, I'm going to do those after the bathroom break.
Okay.
Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X?
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show. All right. The mission itself. Dun, dun, dun. So he announces this once they're actually out to sea. Once they get out there, they're met by some cruisers and some destroyers to actually, comprise the fleet that's going to be escorting the Hornet to where it's going to be actually meeting up with the Enterprise.
Which is coming from Hawaii.
Gotcha. Exactly. And because they're sailing straight out from San Francisco, they're pretty well north of Hawaii, because they're not meaning exactly at Hawaii, because it doesn't work that way. So prior to this, if like this is the kind of stuff that I found out that I never really considered, probably maps of Tokyo and all of that information and of the charts to get there. It's not just someone handing you fucking Google Maps or what was the MapQuest, the one that actually printed out and would give you the turns and been like, hey, you're going to go here, and then this in Tokyo is what you're going to actually bomb. They're not going to just bomb indiscriminately. They're not going to commit fucking war crimes and shit. So they also have to determine what they're going to bomb and where they're actually going to go ahead and do it. So two of the guys actually take about 10 days. I don't know if they were pilots or navigators, but they go up to the Pentagon. They work with these two other guys, and they end up determining the course that they're actually going to take, where they're going to break off to hit different cities, landmarks, ways of locating this, places they've never seen before. I mean, I'm sure they're getting some information from previous like military attaches who had been over in Japan, because we'd had people over there. They'd had people like, remember, Yamamoto had gone to Harvard and everything like that.
So these are the guys that are going to be on the planes that are probably going to be leading these raids that are the navigators, right? Because I was just sitting there trying to think of all of the ways that you would have to be able to just get there, like in the water, and how many things as far as like watching your compass, how fast are you going, what is your wind speed that you're pushing against.
Yeah.
Just to understand accurately how to get there on a boat seems really fucking tough to me.
And when you're flying over nothing but water with no landmarks or anything, you just have to make sure that you're pointed consistently in the right direction, because every little deviation is fuel wasted that you need.
Well, and then you're talking about these navigators that then have to, as you're talking about, get up, head the direction of where their target is going to be, and then once you start to see land, you have to start deciphering exactly where you're going to hit.
And you're flying low to stay out of radar range. So I'll get to it after the launch here. So these two guys go up to the Pentagon. They're working with these other two guys over the course of 10 days. They're able to figure out, develop the maps they're going to need. They make copies for all of the pilots that they're going to take with them, and determine also factories, military targets. They're picking these things out and trying to make sure they have a clear, concise picture, because 16 planes with, 4 bombs each, that's not a lot. They're having to try to maximize the impact that this thing is going to have by hitting these very specific targets. So out of the 16 planes, they're like, we're going to send 10 to Tokyo. That's going to be the main target. Doolittle is adamant when he's going over these plans with them once they get out to sea a little bit. He's like, this is the fucking Royal Palace. Do not go anywhere near the Royal Palace. These are your targets. They don't find out that they're actually going to Japan. I mean, they're heading out in the Pacific, so early thoughts were that they're like, maybe we're going to Africa or something like that. As soon as they got shipped over the Pacific, they're probably like, probably not Japan, but it's going to be something over there. A couple days into the voyage, Doolittle's like, we're bombing Japan, boys. And they're just like, fuck yes.
They're watching the sun come up and they realize that they're headed north now instead of down to Southeast Asia. And they're like, there's nothing else up here. I don't know how aware
those guys, I mean, they're officers, so they know where they're heading. I guess they've got to be talking to each other the whole time. Be like, do you guys know which direction we're heading? We're heading right for fucking Japan.
Well, and if you're coming over the water, I guess you're watching sunset and like where it's hitting potentially to know, but...
these guys are also being tight-lipped because they're not letting any of this information get out to any of the aircraft carrier crew. It's still, an insanely secret mission. So 10 are going to bomb Tokyo, 2 are going to bomb Yokohama, 2 Nagoya, 1 Yokozuka, and 1 Kobe. So they're going to...
cows, man.
I know. So hitting Tokyo, of course, because it's the main center. It's where they should feel the most protected. But at the same time, if you hit them in other places, they're like, oh, this wasn't just an isolated incident here. They're hitting us in other places. It spreads the impact and kind of that psychological fear and that feeling of being unsafe even more. If it was just in Tokyo, everyone would just be like, oh, so Tokyo's the only thing in danger. Let's just leave Tokyo. But if you're thinking, oh shit, they're hitting everywhere, it could be anywhere.
Touch us wherever they want.
That's exactly what it is. So they have their targets. They got them picked out. They come back. They have all the maps. They're starting to go over the information kind of on the voyage. And as they're making their way there. Halsey leaves Hawaii. They end up meeting up at a point, I want to say, kind of like north of where Midway would be. And they have the two carriers together. The reason they have to have this second carrier is they have to have fighter escort. Not for the mission itself, but the combat air patrol that actually goes around, flies way out in front of the carrier group, makes sure that there's no picket boats or Japanese boats that are going to radio, their location and everything like that. So for the first part of the voyage, while the not B-17s, the B-25s are on the deck, it is just Enterprise launching planes for scouting, for protection of it and everything. And then it comes with its own group of like destroyers and cruisers.
So the guys on the Enterprise are looking down at the B-25 on the deck of the Hornet and probably are trying to calculate why they're there.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
What are Army bombers doing on an aircraft carrier?
What are we doing here? Why these guys got a death wish? They're going to run off the end of the boat. 16 of these planes are going to take off and just hit the ocean.
Like what is going on? Your best guess. So they're heading out, and I was kind of curious. This might seem like super like inside baseball, but I was like, why wouldn't they send? You would think you're not just sending like heavy cruisers, because the total accompaniment of this, like it was Task Force 16 and then Task Force 18 together. 2 carriers, 3 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, 8 destroyers, and then 2 oilers, gas stations, basically. I was like, man, why aren't you having any and then I was like, Pearl Harbor took out like 8 of the battleships. We're only at 4.5 months past that. Also, because any operational battleships, if those things were missing from where they were supposed to be and there's any type of Japanese surveillance, it's going to give away that there's a mission. I don't think they're really keeping track of the heavy cruisers and the destroyers because there's so many of them.
Yeah, if that's all you got, if you're depleted, you're not sending more because you don't have more.
Also, something that I thought was kind of weird that I've never thought about. So they're like a day off the West Coast, kind of jumping back a little bit. They're a day off the West Coast, and I think one of the planes had a modification that hadn't been completed yet, and they didn't have the parts. A Navy blimp came and flew out over the aircraft carrier and lowered the parts down to the flight deck.
The Navy's got blimps?
Yes, the Navy had blimps.
That was the fastest mode to get it there?
Well, because you couldn't land on the flight deck because it was taking over
I
B-17s.
guess you don't have... Okay.
No
Have
helicopters.
to be a blimp. Yep.
Had to be a blimp, man.
Has to be something that can't land.
But it was, they dropped off parts by blimp. So April 17th, after they meet up, they're steaming west. They're heading toward Japan. The plan is to get 450 miles from Japan. That's kind of the way that they've mocked up like the mileage for the fuel and everything like that. And once they were off the carrier, they were going to go bomb their targets, and then they were going to be turning southwest toward China. And there had been communication because, the Chinese are fighting the Japanese, we're fighting the Japanese. We have liaisons over there. There had been some communication between, the War Department and I think kind of like the man on the ground, the ranking man on the ground in China about this mission, or about the need to have places for America to land bombers. The closest place that we could land bombers. We also had planned to kind of start bolstering our presence there in that area, I think with a base in Burma, and then be able to start kind of pushing back Japan and making China more open to where we could utilize it a little bit more.
China probably welcome that pretty quickly.
Well, and part of the plan was with the Doolittle Raiders is they were going to bomb their targets. They were going to fly to these airfields that were under the nationalist Revolutionary Army. It was Chiang Kai-shek's.
Yes. One of the best names in history.
Yep. And then you had Mao Zedong, who was the communist. They had called a truce because they were fighting the Japanese. So there were a couple areas that were controlled by the Chiang Kai-shek. And he was like, these are the only places that would be equipped to handle your guys' bombers to actually go ahead and land. The plan was to land these, Doolittle bombers there, keep the planes there for them to start establishing this air force that they could utilize. They would actually land at the first airfields, refuel, and then bring the planes further into friendly territory.
Inland, okay.
Inland, further inland. Well, Japan had, taken over some of the area on the coast, and they were pushing, the Chinese back. So having these places to land and having them in control of Chiang Kai-shek's forces was very important. There were supposed to be beacons, like radio beacons, that were supposed to go ahead and draw the planes in once they got within a certain distance to the airfields to where they could land and then be refueled.
What would the time be from Japan to China?
13 hours.
So there's more than enough time.
Sorry, more. It would have been more because it was 13 hours. The mission ended up being about 13 hours, and it didn't end with them landing.
So once you hit Japan, in theory, once you bomb Japan, then you kind of have to leapfrog the Japanese forces that have made inland into China to then hit those bases.
Yes.
And they have a fair amount of time for island Japan to talk to the forces on the mainland of China. So you're going to be flying over a hot area, I'm assuming?
Yeah, like I guess you would consider the East China Sea was completely controlled by the Japanese.
That's bad. That seems...
Yeah, if you're having to land there, like if you survive the water landing and you get picked up by a boat, chances are it's going to actually be a, Japanese naval vessel.
So no man's land has extended much further past Japan that you're going to be flying over.
Yep.
Damn.
So April 17th, that's when the refueling ships refuel the destroyers, the cruisers, the carriers and everything like that. And the oilers are like, peace out, we're empty, we're heading back. The other support ships follow them for a little bit more. And as the oilers drop back, the destroyers kind of stop as well, because I don't think they can go as fast. They're smaller ships and everything, but they don't have the power that the larger ones do, and also the firepower. So the cruisers and the carriers start speeding ahead. This is this treacherous, basically, it's Logan's Run. You're just running into enemy territory. We're trying to get close enough, launch the planes, and then we're getting the fuck out as quickly as possible.
And we got to hope that the wind's blowing in the direction we need it to.
Well, it's going to, because you're just going to turn the carrier in whatever direction that you need. But still, you would want to be like, if we can get a wind blowing toward Japan, once these planes are off the flight deck, that's just going to help with fuel. So yeah, you are hoping for that kind of stuff too. April 18th in the morning, the task force is actually spotted by a Japanese picket boat 650 miles out.
Of course.
Their goal was to get 450 miles out. So Doolittle and one of the cruisers breaks off and actually sinks this picket boat, but they detected a radio signal was actually sent back. So they're like, the jig is up. We have no idea, where the Japanese Navy or what ships may be in the larger area. We're kind of exposed, especially with us not being able to have 2 carriers worth of like fighter cover and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So Doolittle and Captain Mitcher, who's the captain of the Hornet, basically are like, it's kind of like we're committed at this point.
It's now or never, I guess.
So we're 10 hours and 200 miles early in this thing. And yeah, they had calculated having a little bit of extra fuel and everything, but you don't know what you're going to run into. You could be a headwind. Like every little bit is just increasing the odds of this mission not working.
They calculated the extra fuel for whatever they were going to have to take on if they got to the correct spot.
Yeah.
They didn't calculate extra fuel for launching further away.
Exactly. And so the decision is made, hey, we're launching right now.
Damn.
And so he has the planes. I want to say they load up 12. He has every plane as they're getting loaded up. He's like, throw 12 5-gallon gas cans into each plane. And they kind of factored what it would actually be, because there was a B-25, like an older pilot that had a private plane, a private B-25, which is the coolest fucking thing I can think of. And he was like, well, the modifications that they made, their cruising speed was going to be about 150 miles an hour. They were dialed in for gas efficiency on this. That extra gas could get them another, they said 80 miles, which could be the difference between 80 miles into enemy territory, outside of enemy territory, 80 miles out to sea, inland. Like it saved all of them having this extra fuel. You
have a route to the fuel tank inside the plane?
So because you have that neoprene bladder on top of the bomber bay,
you
have the 60 tank, the 60-gallon tank where the previous bottom turret was.
Yeah, so everything's
I'm
feeding.
sure-
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'm sure
they're pouring
once-
into the turret probably.
And I was trying to kind of think in my mind how this would work because they showed a cutaway diagram of it. And in the B-25, the only way you could get to the rear of the plane was crawling over the bomb bay. There wasn't like a walkthrough, and that was taken up by that 160-pound bladder.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that one was probably used first. That way it could flatten. Someone could crawl back there because there wasn't someone in the back of the plane. They didn't have guns back there. Would have to crawl back there and probably like put the fuel in.
That makes more sense.
So they end up launching. One of the reasons that this was also such a gamble, not just the fact that nothing like this had been done before, but at this time, the United States had 4 operational aircraft carriers, and 2 of them are committed to this mission. Half of the carrier power, and again, 8 battleships, not in working condition, 4 of them sunk, 4 of them damaged, not available. So these 4 carriers are pretty much the bulk of our projected sea power in the Pacific, and 2 of them are being committed to this. It's an insane gamble with resources.
Not only the resources, but think about the morale of your country if these guys come up short because they run out of fuel, or it's just a complete fart in the wind.
If it comes out that you lost 2 carriers,
Yeah.
it's going to come out where you lost the 2 carriers. It's going to come out why you lost the 2 carriers and what they were doing there. And people are going to be like, you were just trying to bomb them with 16 planes and you lost a carrier, 2 carriers out of it. Like, the trade-off is not worth it in any way you want to slice it. So they decide to launch. They all get in their planes. Doolittle's first, of course.
Had to be.
The weather sucks. They're kind of in a storm at this point.
Have we ever done an episode with like ideal flying conditions?
No.
It just never seems to happen.
No. And again, this is 10 hours early. The weather could have gotten better or anything. So it's pitching up and down in the seas. They said when Doolittle had written a book, and he said when he was sitting there, brakes on, in the cockpit, he would watch the front of the deck. And in one moment, it would be pointing down and you would just see water. The next moment it came up, you would be looking at nothing but sky. And that would be happening while the planes were getting ready to launch. You're already worried that you're not going to be able to get this thing off. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, now what if I come off of it when it's on a down? So they had a flagger down at the end of the flight deck who was timing the rhythm of the waves, and had to calculate and knew the time frame between
speed,
this and when it would lift off, and would give them a flag down when to go. So as the plane was coming up, it was lifting the flight deck and it was lifting the plane off of the flight deck. So they end up turning into the wind, and because of the speed of the wind against them, and then also the speed of the carrier going into the wind, that B-25 guy was like, it takes 85 miles an hour to actually get the plane airborne. You have to get up to 145 miles an hour to ensure that if one engine goes out, the plane is at a speed in which it can maintain that speed and maintain controlled flight. The calculation of the wind that was coming against the carrier, I think, was like 25 miles an hour. They had determined through all of their testing that when the flat position that the wings had to be in was pointed almost down to try to cause as much uplift as possible. That's where they would get the most lift.
You're trying to catch as much air as you can under those wings.
As you try to build speed, you got to get off. The priority is off the flight deck, then get speed in order to go ahead and get to, cruising speed or whatnot. So combined, you had 45 miles per hour of wind already working for you.
Okay, 4 is good.
Exactly. You had to get up to 85. So you got to, but still, the distance that they were going, it ends up being the flight deck was 467 feet to take off. And normally, again, these planes required 1,200 plus. And they're fully loaded. Fuel, bombs, everything. So you need every advantage you can get.
I have no doubt that you've answered this question in one of these episodes in the past. As they're launching, the boat is still moving forward? Like, it's still going, or is it stationary?
It's going. That's how it's creating
gosh.
so if you were on a windless day,
Yeah.
the boat would be creating its own wind by just simply moving through.
Okay.
So that's where you would get the additional lift that it would help.
Gotcha.
They also just happened to have, even though the seas were shitty and everything, they just so happened to have a wind coming against them too that helped with it.
So the flagger guy has to know all that.
Yeah.
Plus how many seconds they have to get down the runway. That's too much.
So
That's like the most important job on the ship.
yeah. So they kind of the procedure, wheels are locked with the brakes. You power the engines all the way up to takeoff speed. You release the brakes and you just fucking throttle down and try to take off. So they're going. Doolittle ends up lifting off. I think they said maybe like 100 feet before the end of the flight deck. And everyone's like, oh, okay.
This is easy.
And then everyone behind him gets an extra because the length of these B-25s was about 52 feet.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, every guy behind is gaining 52 feet to go up and kind of taxi and get going. At that point, you're just worried about the pitch of the deck at that point. One of the planes that was kind of behind another guy that was taxiing and powering up his engines, all of them had their flaps down, ready to go. Mm-hmm. But because you're essentially, when those flaps go down, you're creating a kite.
Yeah.
The prop blast started shifting his plane and sliding it sideways off the deck. And so he's like, shit, and reaches down and pulls the flaps up to where they're level again. And it stopped the plane from moving. So a few planes later, he ends up pulling up and getting ready to go. He forgets to lower his flaps. So part of that 20 miles per hour that they'd be generating and everything, that additional 20.
Full flap down.
That's full flap down. So they're working now on 25 miles an hour of wind coming against them. One of the guys, he didn't lower the flap, so he didn't think to check about it. The guy that did it got distracted. They end up taking off, and there's footage. You can actually watch like footage on YouTube about the planes taking off and everything. He takes off and he's going level with the flight deck, and you can see him start dropping down a little bit. And he's still going straight. He's just a little bit below level, and then he gains speed, and he ends up taking off. So still able to make it. All 16 made it up into the air within an hour. That also brings in something I was thinking about. When planes all go up as a group like that, they don't just take off and head for the location.
Yeah, you got to circle.
They circle. So in this hour, they're burning Doolittle and the guys in front. Doolittle's burning an hour. The guy behind him is 55 minutes, 50 minutes. Like, you're burning this fuel up there, which Doolittle had to be like, well, I got to show him that it can be done. But at the same time, I guess I'm taking the risk too, because I'm going to have the least amount of fuel.
It's also tough because as soon as you were saying that, it's like, oh, so you want to be the last person off the boat.
Yeah, because of the distance you're gaining and because you have the most fuel.
But at the same time, if you're the last guy off the boat, it means you're the last one going over, that if anything gets launched up in the air after you guys are hitting, you're going to be the one getting chased.
Well, and yeah, they could always catch up though. Because what would happen is they would circle, they would get into formation, and then they would actually head that way. So they fly in little groups, maybe like 3 or 4, and they're flying low. They call it wave top, but it's a little bit above the waves. But they're staying to where radar can't pick them up. So it showed footage of when they were training, and it shows this B-25 just like, I don't know if it was in Florida, it might have been when they were in South Carolina, just zipping over the treetops, and it looks like they're going up to dodge a tree and then coming back down. It's fucking insane, because you're thinking like a fighter, yeah, those things are nimble and agile, but this thing's just like...
It's a bomber.
Yeah. So they're flying low in small groups. Takes them 6 hours to get to Tokyo. As they get and see land, they all kind of branch off to go to their targets. Their targets aren't in huge, distant places in Japan. They're relatively close enough to Tokyo to where they're not like, I'm not flying 2 hours out of my way to burn this much gas and then turning and trying to head toward China. Relatively close to Tokyo. So after they bomb, they're all kind of heading from the same direction over the East China Sea. Tokyo ends up getting hit. The other targets end up getting hit. They experience some light anti-aircraft fire. They're completely, taken back by this.
Yeah.
They actually had a air raid drill. You know how stuff comes out after the war and when everyone's trading especially where, the victors get to just go in and be like, hey, give us all your fucking records for what happened.
We want that. We want that.
Exactly.
Taking that.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see that on PBS next week.
So they had an air raid like test or something like that the day before. So they just thought it was actually planes like heading back somewhere else until the bombs started dropping. They're dropping these things from 1,500 feet. They said they could actually like make visual contact with people, and people would look up and they would be close enough to where they could see guys like in the glass bubble.
Stupid to say, but 1,500 feet, you're that big of a plane in the air, you're going to be pretty noticeable.
Oh, yeah, loud as fuck.
Yeah.
So some fighters end up coming up to try to intercept them, but none of them end up, I think one guy ends up taking damage, but it's not enough to like kill an engine or anything like that. He just gets hit a little bit. And they're like, that's kind of weird. Like, we're in bombers, we're a little bit slower and all that. Japan had that mentality of being so well defended by this divine wind and providence, whatever the fuck they thought. The emperor protecting them with his mental shield. They never considered that they would need good, experienced fighter pilots defending the home island and defending the city. So it was just guys that had been training, like inexperienced pilots that were going up and not knowing really what to do. They were getting fired at from these bombers as well. And just like none of them getting hit at all or shot down and everything ends up being this insane embarrassment, as well as like not only just being bombed and letting this happen, but the simple fact that you're like, yeah, we didn't shoot any of them down. Like they were just able to like walk into the house, raid the fridge, and then head out.
Front page news the next day in Japan is divine wind stops Mongolians. Divine wind doesn't stop U.S. Air Force.
Doesn't stop B-52s. Well, and I think they said they shot down 3 fighters.
They said.
Not the Japanese, the American pilots. They ended up coming back, said they shot down 3 fighters. Which, I mean, you're 10 planes over Tokyo. If you're an inexperienced pilot, you don't know how to stay out of the path. These guys are experienced B-52 or B-25 crew. They know where to fire.
Yeah.
It's believable. So as soon as they're done dropping their payloads, 15 of them actually head to China in the southwest. One of them is like, we don't have the fuel to get there. This is the plane that they fucked up the carburetors on and turned them back to the settings.
They reset it back to factory?
Yep. And this plane is like, we can't get there. So they end up heading northeast to Vladivostok, which is in Russia. Now, that had originally been part of a plan where before they decided on China, they talked to Stalin and they were like, hey, if we have to land planes here, because we're allies, can we land them here? And they're like, we have a non-aggression pact with the Japanese. We can't be seen assisting in that. After
the Russo-Japanese War, probably?
Yeah, that's what gave Japan its big britches to think it could take on anybody and everybody. So they're like, yeah, we can't be caught doing that because if it violates the truce, we have so many of our resources locked up on the Eastern Front dealing with the Nazis that if they wanted to, the Japanese would make a lot of headway into Siberia before we could stop them. And they probably don't need much of an excuse either to do so. So
no, they're already hot in China. They figured out a reason to be mad at China and Southeast Asia. They could probably figure something out with us.
Yep. So this airfield in Vladivostok is 660 miles away, and this plane is like, fuck it, we're doing it. And they head for this place. They end up landing like 40 at an airfield, like 40 miles outside the town. The plane is actually impounded. They're taken into, and I'm doing quotes here, custody and everything. The plan was if they were originally allowed to do this, they were just going to land all 16 of them there and be like, hey, Russia, lend lease. Take these planes, have fun, and then they'd be able to get their guys back a lot faster.
I'm sure Stalin would have been cool with that.
Mm-hmm. So as the plane is impounded, the crew is arrested. I'll come back to them in a second. So they end up landing.
Technically, they are prisoners of war?
Technically, yes. They are. The other 15 are heading for China, 16 to 1,800 miles away. So the flight to Japan was the short flight. The long flight is getting to China over the East China Sea.
Over a potentially hot area now.
Yeah. So 13 hours after takeoff, 15 planes end up making it to China. They're low on fuel. These beacons that were supposed to be going off to direct them where to fly to get refueled, they're not going off. What ended up happening is after they launched the B-25s, the aircraft carriers turned and just hauled ass back.
You have
and
to.
You did.
Especially if you were made out by that boat.
Oh, and I'm not criticizing this at all. But Halsey was like, not a word. We're not going to radio China and tell them to turn on the beacons or anything. Any type of communication from here. The fleet could already be heading out to try to intercept us. Any type of signal to let them know where we're at, it's not worth these two carriers. So, I mean, you can't really fault that logic there. So, 13 hours after takeoff, they make it to China, and it's getting dark. They're low on fuel. If they didn't have a little bit of luck on their side, for 7 hours after they had taken off and started flying across the East China Sea, they got a 29 mile per hour tailwind for 7 hours. This basically ensured that they actually made it to mainland. They wouldn't have made it without that extra fuel that they loaded on last minute. And without that tailwind, they don't make it to China.
They were kite flying. Instead of having the flaps down to catch the wind, you're having the flaps down to push you a little further.
Yep. Well, at that point, you're just getting over land to get over land. You don't have any place to actually land. So through either a series of, I want to call them improvised landings, but I think most of them actually just got to altitude and then bailed out. The crews ended up bailing out. Out of all the planes, the 15 that made it, one guy actually died bailing out, and then 2 full crews were missing. So you have 13 crews that actually make it and are kind of accounted for as far as like landing, that they're able to actually locate the people and everything once they make it into friendly territory. This is all stuff kind of in hindsight that, the information comes out afterward.
So how many of these planes landed intact?
None. Oh, no. The only one to make the 3-wheel landing was the one in Vladivostok.
Yeah, so in
the
Russia.
16th, yep.
So the whole juice is worth the squeeze for China is getting these B-25s that then they can move inland and kind of maybe start making some headway.
As soon as they heard that the planes bombed Japan, they didn't give a fuck. They would have given these guys anything, and they did. As soon as they find out that they attacked the Japanese, they were just like, what do you need? And these guys aren't bailing out over territory that they know is being held by Chiang Kai-shek's
It's
people.
dark. All dark.
And they don't know. They
a
maybe
lot
have
of
some
jungle.
landmarks and everything like that. So most of the crew actually found safety through either help from civilians, villagers, or actually locating like Chinese soldiers. They had to, of course, convince them, and I'm not sure how hard it was, that they were Americans and everything, but they end up kind of being shuttled or like kind of taken to at least like kind of a centralized area where some of the crews end up meeting up.
Yeah.
So 69 of them end up escaping capture or death, and 3 of them are actually killed in action. And this is kind of during the raid itself. 8 members of the 2 missing crews were actually taken as POWs. And how we found out about it is the Swiss consulate, who was in Shanghai, found out that there were 8 American pilots or bomber crew being held at the Shanghai police station by the Japanese. So we knew that there were 8 of them out of those 2 missing crews. The Swiss consulate had like past information.
They just had them at the police station?
It has cells. They had just taken over the city because that had been previously like the Chiang Kai-shek's people's territory.
Okay.
They were just utilizing these places that were already fortified. They could keep prisoners there. I think that was probably more of a normal thing than you would think.
Than like prison camps out at a base or something like that.
The other 2 out of those 10, the 5 on each crew, ended up dying. They actually drowned. The airplane they made it to China, but they had crashed like kind of close to the coast. And those 2 ended up not making out, but they actually were recovered post-war.
I know we've talked about it a lot in previous episodes about sometimes pilots getting a different experience being POWs. Or officers, maybe, is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the same with the Japanese?
No.
No?
No, this wasn't a...
They were probably pretty mad about what we just did.
This wasn't a Germany situation where... Here's the thing. The whole reason why Germany developed these, what they call them, stalags or whatever they were, where they kept like the officers and the pilots and everything like that, is because they knew that the British had German pilots. They knew there was a tit for tat shit about
Oh.
treatment, and so you couldn't mistreat them. They wouldn't mistreat your guys.
Picture is becoming more clear now. Okay.
Yeah, Japan didn't have that. They weren't. We didn't have any of their people. So at this point in time, these were the pilots that had just bombed Tokyo, that had just put the emperor in danger.
Yeah.
And so,
good.
8 of them POWs, 2 of them drowned. Through, a series of like time and making their way and everything like that, most of the Doolittle Raiders end up getting into allied friendly China, end up meeting up. It's kind of like through a series of like events trying to fly into other friendly territory. I'm not sure, and I probably should have done more research. I'm not sure exactly how they all ended up getting back. If they had to finally get shuttled down to Australia or something like that, or if they made their way the other way across the continent to try to get to some place like Iran or Egypt that was held or some shit like that.
No.
India. You could even try to maybe get to India because that was British held.
Like, think about where you're landing.
Hold on.
Okay.
The reason I bring that up is because let's get back to our 16th plane that landed in Russia.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so these guys are incarcerated technically, and a few months later, they're actually moved to a location that's 20 miles from Allied occupied Iran. So they're moved all the way from like the fucking easternmost portion of Russia all the way to within 20 miles of the border with Iran, which is just conveniently Allied occupied.
You got to keep them you can't let them escape back the way they came.
Well, the official story that's provided to the Japanese that shows them they didn't violate the treaty is that the American captain actually bribed a smuggler to get them there to help them escape. What ends up coming out after records are declassified, the NKVD, which, I can't wait to do an episode on them. They were the precursor to the KGB. The NKVD, who was the spy organization during Stalin World War II, actually staged their escape and actually helped them get into, of course, Allied occupied territory.
It's so weird to hear that sentence. Like, the fact that we've kind of made peace with Stalin being the third of the figurehead of the Allied powers. Stalin, very bad guy.
Yes.
The NKVD.
Don't believe us? There's a 2-parter that lists all of it.
NKVD, working for Stalin. Probably pretty bad guys.
Probably not. Probably not the kind of guys you want to be in an adversarial position with.
But if you're trying to get your pilots smuggled back somewhere else, they become a very handy tool to have.
Oh, yeah. You're just ingratiating yourself.
It's so weird.
Keep the B-25, and for getting our pilots back, we'll send you a few more.
Yeah, it's just so weird to think like NKVD good.
Yeah. Well, it's circumstantial is what it is. So the 8 that are captured are essentially put on a show trial. The documentaries and the podcasts I listen to doing research break this thing down into essentially like this big legal struggle for what's allowed, because you do have certain things that have been established by it was the Geneva Convention, correct?
After World War I think so.
Or was that the Treaty of Versailles? Treaty of Versailles was 2 or 1? Fuck. Treaty of Versailles was World War I.
History podcast.
I understand that, but we've also discussed so much history, and it's been a period of time since we've looked into that. I'm not sure. You go ahead and Google it. I'll keep going. So they're trying to figure out, because again, this is a country that also just 4.5 months earlier surprise attacked and bombed and killed a shit ton of people at Pearl Harbor.
Treaty of Versailles.
Okay, it was World War II or World War I?
World War I.
Okay.
1919.
So, but that also established rules for treatments of prisoners of war. They're trying to find this balance between retribution for the Japanese people for the damage and the lives taken, which it ends up being, I think, in this raid, like 100 injured, like maybe 50 dead, minimal property destruction, but it hit like a Mitsubishi plant. One of the bombs actually hit a carrier that was in like development and everything and delayed it for a couple months. But for the most part, they didn't do a ton of damage. There's not enough bombs there to really make a dent.
No, but it's a statement.
The psychological part was so much more important than the actual bombs themselves.
The fires in Tokyo with the wooden structures was not great.
Well, yeah, but when you're only dropping one bundle of incendiaries, they're going to be able to keep it pretty much on. This isn't Dresden where it's just an insane amount of exactly
early carpet bombing.
Yeah. So they're put on a show trial, and at this point, while the trial is happening, Midway has already happened, which means that during this trial and the way that they're trying to frame this and figure out what to do, they now are looking at themselves in a very weakened position and compared to the United States. And they're like, yeah, so we can't kill all these guys. If we kill all 8 of these prisoners, if we do end up having to sign a treaty or surrender to the United States, this is not going to look good on what we did to these guys. So they kind of end up splitting the difference. Out of the 8, 5 of them are actually, their sentences are commuted to just life, and 3 of them are actually executed by, I believe, firing squad.
So they still killed them.
They still end up killing them. One of the 5 ends up dying of like malnutrition or disease in a POW camp. After that, they started treating the other 4 a little bit better because they're like, oh, fuck, now we're down to actually half of it. If we kill the rest of them, it's going to be just like we killed them and executed them anyway.
Except worse because we let him starve to death.
Exactly. 4 of them are actually freed in August of 1945, 3+ years in captivity. So that's 3 of them. Or sorry, 4 of them. One of the guys, his last name was Barr. He kind of had like a pretty severe mental breakdown. This is just kind of a side story on it. Of course, as he would. And as they bring him back to the States, he is in such a mental condition that he thinks that because they were tortured and shit, there was a torture that they did to them where they would take either a broomstick or a metal rod and they would put it behind their knees. Like if you imagine you're standing on your knees or sitting on your knees, your feet are back behind you. Mm-hmm. They would take it and put it behind your knees, and then they would lean you back and they would stomp on your thighs, trying to actually use that wedge, that fulcrum, to separate the joints in your knees.
Jesus.
As part of this torture. So this guy's obviously PTSD fucked up, understandably so. And he thinks that this mental hospital, this psychiatric hospital he's been put into is a ruse by the Japanese and they're fucking with him. He thinks even though everyone is American there, he thinks it's all some act that they're trying to get information out of him. And it isn't and Doolittle took care of his guys.
Yeah, he should.
Those were his guys. Of course, this is further down the road and everything removed from the mission. He goes and actually meets this guy. And they said as soon as he saw him, they're like, okay, I know that this isn't a trick anymore. They wouldn't have him. He wouldn't be coming in and saying that I'm safe. And the guy ends up making a full recovery. But I mean, it just shows you, I mean, like the fucking trauma that you would go through with being tortured and all this kind of stuff for 3+ years is insane. And that's not even the worst part I'm going to get into here.
Well, you got to think however bad that was, once you're on the other side and once you really get like a full grasp on the survivor's guilt, because you're feeling it already pretty much. They probably, the 3 that got executed were probably the 3 highest rankers? Three highest in rank, or was it just you, and you?
You know what? I think they probably had coerced. I want to say I heard that they had coerced some type of confession, because I do want to say, because of course bombing is not perfect. There's stuff right next to other stuff. You're not trying to hit it, but I think they hit a couple schools and a hospital. So not great.
No.
And so I don't know if it's the guys that admitted to being the one that dropped the bomb on it or something like that. Again, this is something that it's a fucking kangaroo court.
Yeah.
They're just trying to go ahead and placate while at the same time not losing all of the bargaining chips in case, shit goes even further south for them.
Probably some torture during the confessions too, maybe.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So
as they're trying to separate your knees, they're like fucking confessing. You're like, I fucking dropped bombs. Yeah, That's what we all did.
So you get over that first initial survivor's guilt. Then you have somebody die in camp.
Yeah.
And then you get back and realize that you had a 50-50 chance of living.
Yeah. And at that point, you don't know that.
No.
Yeah, you have no clue. Doolittle is, of course, like within like Chinese occupied territory at this point. April 28th rolls around. While he's still in China, they automatically send him up 2 ranks. They find out because he landed, he was able to communicate back. He let him know. He thought he was going to get court-martialed. He's like, I just lost 16 planes and I've lost some crew. He's like, I'm fucking going to get court-martialed when I get home. They're like, actually, we're actually going to make you a brigadier general. We're skipping a rank and you're going straight up to this rank. At some point, I want to say he was knighted as well.
Should be.
Because after this, he stays in the Air Force. He goes and he commands Air Force, I don't want to say division, but a group of planes in Africa, then somewhere else. But then he takes over and commands the 8th Air Force at the tail end of the war. The 8th Air Force is the one that we focused on during that Bomber Boys or the Bomber episode about Europe. He actually, toward that end period when they're just hammering Berlin and like the interior of Germany, he's actually in charge of the 8th Air Force.
Sir Jimmy Doolittle has a ring to it.
Sir, I think you probably would be like, she's like, Sir James. He's like, it's actually Jimmy, Your Highness. Are you serious? Yeah. Sir Jimmy Doolittle. Like the name itself just is ridiculous enough. It's got to sound made up.
She's rolling her eyes as she's doing it.
Yeah.
And the British military guys are looking at her like, no, let him do this.
Yeah. All 80 of them received the Distinguished Flying Cross. And Doolittle lobbied for promotions for every single one of them, which they all received. Some of the guys actually stayed and fought in China, 28 of them, in fact. They, I want to say they were running additional bomber missions and doing some other stuff. Some of them ended up getting shot down and killed in China. Really, none of these guys were like done after this because it was so early on in the war. Yeah. They were like, oh, we made it back. Where are we going next? 19 of them went and served over in the Mediterranean as like bomber pilots and bomber crew. 9 of them actually served in the European theater. In fact, this dude, when I text you about the Great Escape, this guy, Davy Jones, actually was shot down over Nazi-occupied territory in Europe, ended up being put in Stalag Luft 2 or 3. I can't remember the exact name because there were multiple of these pilot and officer camps, and he was involved in the Great Escape. And the Great Escape isn't just the Charles Bronson, James Garner, Steve McQueen movie. Yeah. It actually happened. It was this super elaborate escape attempt out of this Nazi, prisoner of war camp. It's insane. We're going to be doing an episode on it in the future, but he was actually involved in that. So to be like, oh yeah, I did the Doolittle Raid and I was also involved in the Great Escape, like that's pretty nuts.
I think half the reason I would want to go back home is just to brag.
Well,
just to tell everybody.
No, you can't. This is still top secret. Dude, this stuff does not...
It doesn't... When is it the papers, though? Once it hits the papers, I guess maybe you don't mention it, or...
Yeah, because here's the thing. You're not allowed to discuss it because what's released to the papers is the information that you want them to know. American bombers bombed Tokyo. Tokyo unsafe. Part of it is also maintaining the mystery and having the Japanese high command being like, how the fuck did they do this? You can't go out and start giving out that information, because if they find out, oh, it was from an aircraft carrier, like there were bombers though. How does that, like that hasn't been done. Part of the mystery was what made them feel unsafe about it. And I remember Roosevelt gave an address where he was responding to like the Japanese, like fucking being boggled by how this happened. He's like, oh yeah, they flew out of Shangri-La. And what's even fucking cooler about that is there was an aircraft carrier that got commissioned not commissioned, but actually like launched and everything a few years later. They changed the name from what it was originally going to be to the Shangri-La. And Eleanor is the one that fucking like christened it or like sponsored the ship.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess that's the other thing too, is the last thing you want is your name getting around to be a part of it, because if you're going to be flying missions back around there and you do get caught and somehow they find out that you were one of the guys that was
Doolittle, I think that's why they sent them across.
Yeah.
I think that's why they didn't let them, because if they've, again, remember we kind of talked about like the information network that like the Japanese had, and they would have information and know who pilots were. And the fucking Germans and the Nazis did the same thing. They would have all of this information and be able to be like, your name is this, you're from this place. Fucking crazy what they would know about people to try to get information out of them. So I think that's probably why they sent, for the majority, the 28 did actually stay in China, but I'm sure they were doing other shit. Were probably sent kind of into other theaters. 12 of them died in air crashes within the first 15 months after the
Damn.
mission, which, I mean, 12, that's not huge. It's a chunk out of that because it's a smaller number, but
Yeah.
still, in the war in 15 months, only 12 of them, I think that's still pretty good. Getting back over to the worst part about this, the reprisal. So all of these civilians that had helped the Doolittle Raiders escape and find safety and all that kind of stuff, during the initial reprisal, I think they said about 10,000 civilians were killed by the Japanese for being suspected of actually helping any of these Doolittle Raiders. So 80 pilots, the 69 that ended up surviving, all that kind of stuff, your reprisal is killing 10,000 civilians. And that's the start. That's the appetizer. The campaign that, the campaign that the Japanese wage, I'm going to butcher the shit out of this, is the Zinji campaign. Yeah, probably
Sounded good to me. It was great.
And this is basically a scorched earth, wave of locust type campaign in which the Japanese are like, okay, we got to make sure that from nowhere in China do the Americans have the ability to take off planes or land planes in order to attack the home islands. So they go scorched earth through these sections of China, brutalizing and basically killing, when all said and done, an estimated 250,000 civilians during these reprisals. Again, 10,000 initially are killed just in the search for the Doolittle Raiders. And what the way they go about it is in like such violation of like the international codes of like conduct for war and everything, even at the time. The Japanese spread cholera, typhoid, plague fleas. We all know what that is now. And dysentery. They had a biological warfare unit called Unit 731, who brought in 300 pounds of paratyphoid and anthrax to contaminate food and wells in China to keep killing additional people.
So this is just a slash and burn campaign to make sure that
we're gonna make everyone pay, and then the area in which you're all in, we're gonna make it uninhabitable, so no one can come back in here to help anybody else try to bomb the home islands.
We're gonna salt the earth.
Exactly.
Damn.
That's exactly what it was. 250,000 in reprisal for a raid that killed or injured less than 150. I think that gets lost, what went on in Europe and everything like that. And I'm not saying one needs to take precedence or shine or be put on a higher pedestal than the other, but like the war crimes and shit that like Japan did, not even, just to even POWs from, the United States, Australia, all those, Brits that were fighting over there, but especially in fucking China, like the rape of Nanjing or, the Bataan Death March, all that kind of stuff. And then to know that they have biological warfare units and everything just to like contaminate and try to fucking kill additional people is kind of bonkers.
Asia's underrated for war crime talk.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because we already have a mind-boggling enough time with Europe. Mm-hmm. And also what was going on in Europe was more of a world thing, whereas what was going on in the Pacific was literally us, everybody in Southeast Asia we wanted to protect, China, and then Japan was just
fucking
pissing
everyone.
on everybody.
Yeah. And this is one of those times, and I know we always come back to this in any episodes that are related to China. No fucking shit, they are so isolationist and strong in their certain, like, I'm not fucking pro-communism here or anything like that. There are socialist values that fire departments, social service, all that kind of stuff that are really good. What I'm saying is when you're a country or a nation that is fucked with by everybody on such a consistent basis throughout history, the Opium Wars, the Brits taking certain territory, Japan just constantly fucking with you and everything, you're going to be like, we can't trust anybody. We're going to sit in here. We're going to grasp onto this ideology, which is sold as making us self-sufficient, not needing everyone else. I feel like that was the sell for communism. Yeah. This will make you self-sufficient as a nation to where you don't have to rely on other people who are going to fuck you over. And China's just like, cool, we'll go with that. Has it worked out well for them? I don't know. I don't fucking live there. What I'm saying is I have an understanding, or at least I believe I do, of why that country is kind of the way it is. It's because everyone has fucked with it at some point.
We're talking all the way back to the Mongolians.
Yeah.
They had their own dynasty in China.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody has kind of taken a shot at them. And I think it's just because they are a very seemingly fertile, decent chunk of land.
You look at it and you're just like, it's agrarian. Like, you can grow all kinds of stuff. You can feed large portions of people. Like, why not?
And they've just constant.
Yeah.
To know, too, like, I don't want to make generalizations, but say Iran was where, I guess Cuba's semi-apt, even though it feels like they're still communist, but they're just not a world threat, really. But say Iran is where Cuba was.
Not according to us.
No, not according to us. But say Iran is where Cuba is, and we have that volatile of an enemy right next door to us. That's just what China had to live with Japan all the time.
And they constantly fuck with you.
Yeah.
All the time.
And then after the war's over and Japan's been neutered, then you're still very angry about what they did to you, but now they're trying to sell you that they're a peaceful nation and they're not going to do it again.
That's going to be, and I don't know if that's something we've thought about for an episode, but put on the list what the repercussions or what the outcome was on the negotiations between Japan and China for recompense.
Yeah.
Of what, like, it was, were they put on trial or anything like that, like we did for the Japan trials and the Nuremberg trials and everything. Did China have its own version of that with Japan that it had to go through?
They had their Tokyo trials like we did?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
So getting back to the Raiders. So they end up, kind of going over. Some of them end up dying later in the war. The ones that actually survive everything, starting in the late 1940s, they start having a meetup once a year or almost every year between that period. I think there were a couple years they missed, all the way up until 2013.
And that was the last guy?
Well, kind of here's what ends up going down. So during every meeting, every man that was part of the Doolittle Raid has a silver goblet. Says his name on it engraved, right side up. And if you turn the goblet, it also has it upside down. So, like, what I'm saying, though, is it has their name printed twice, one right side up, one.
It's mirrored.
So it always, well, not, kind of, it actually would be. So regardless of which way it's facing, you can read their name.
I love that.
Part of this.
That's 2013 is so far removed. Like,
it's not. Come on. It is, but it's not.
But
when you're talking about the late 40s to 2013, that scope is kind of what the impressive part is.
That's the impressive part, and I'm not saying that it's any less, as far as less of a big deal, but you're constantly meeting with these guys that it's just, there was 80 of you that you said that got to do it.
Yeah.
And there have been a million other incredible feats done since. But you're still meeting in 2013 for something that only 80 of you did.
Well, yeah, exactly. And here's the thing. The outcome that this is going to have as far as the reverberations are going to be wide reaching, but it's hard to quantify. I'll get to those in just a second. So during this meeting, part of it is an annual roll call where they'll call the guys, that are still living and everything. They do a toast to the years fallen, and they do cognac out of the silver goblets. If someone's not there, their goblet goes, and they died the year before, their goblet goes upside down.
So you can still read the name, but it's upside down.
Yep, exactly. So 2013 was the last reunion, and it took place near Eglin Field, where they actually trained. And I believe during that time, there were still 3 or 4 guys alive. Only one of them was able to make it, which is why they made it, I think, the last one. But since 2006, the goblets and then kind of the rest of the memorabilia and display and everything like that are at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Ohio. So mark that on the list of somewhere we have to go.
Very cool.
To look through that. The last Raider died 2019 at the age of 103. I believe he was the co-pilot to Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle, I want to say, died in 1993. But thinking again, he was 44 years old when this mission went down.
Yeah, and he was born in the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he made it quite a ways. kind of going like we were talking about the outcomes for this. So part of this showed that, there was essentially a hole in the armor. And again, it's really hard to quantify because the numbers just aren't there. But there was a lot of pressure for Japan because they eventually figured out that these things had to be carrier-launched aircraft. They knew that carriers were still a threat. They couldn't be in every single place at once. This is when Yamamoto, having that thought in the back of his brain about like, I miss the fucking carriers at Pearl Harbor. Probably that's still nagging at him. Now it brings that thought right to the forefront of saying, we have to eliminate. They're not out of the fight. We have to eliminate their carrier power, and we're going to do it at Midway. And I think this puts pressure on maybe going into a plan that isn't the most well thought out, because again, go back, listen to the Midway episode. It took a lot of luck on the United States side to actually pull this kind of thing off. And during Midway, the Battle of Midway, we sunk 4 of the Japanese aircraft carriers, like their 4 main ones at the time. And from that point, that was the turning point in the Pacific War where America went on the offensive and started driving the Japanese back. If there's not this pressure from the Doolittle Raid that shows that carrier aircraft are a danger to their home island, to their emperor, that's got to make you see some plans and look at them and be like, normally I wouldn't think that's a good idea, but I'm kind of in a desperate position, so maybe we do need to take that swing. Resources end up getting pulled from areas that are being defended from the Japanese, or resources that are going to be used to take more territory, and they have to be moved back to the home islands to provide a defense. You have to bring back pilots that are able to provide air cover, because guess what? You didn't shoot down one of those planes when they flew overhead. So now all of a sudden, those pilots that were out and able to go ahead and contribute on the front lines are now back, and you're taking resources off the front lines.
I think that's the biggest thing that I take away from this was, it was, like you said, the numbers don't really justify what it did. It was 110% a moral victory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like after everything that you said, the number one thing that it is they always have to be looking over their shoulder now. Yep. They always have to be looking back at home and thinking, they got us once.
And you have to be like, well, how do we stop it? We got to take swings. We got to try to, and you're overlooking the cracks in certain plans.
You become erratic when before you were very regimented.
Exactly. Like you just said, American morale went through the fucking roof. The way this thing was framed is it was the great. I mean, in reality, just from a planning perspective and being able to pull this thing off, I don't care if they just dropped leaflets or that said like, we can get to you. Like signed FDR or whatever. The simple fact that psychological just mind fuck was placed in there and said like, yeah, you can't actually get to our home. We can get to your home. That had to put a lot of like just asses in the fire about like, what do we need to do to protect this place? How much do we have to pull back? What do we have to do as far as our future plans of expansion to put those on hold? Because now we have to worry about getting hit, in our yard.
And at the same time, you're probably thinking back to, we didn't mention it in this episode, but Yamamoto knew that this wasn't going to end well.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, he told them from the beginning.
He's like, we have a year.
Yeah.
We have, even if Pearl Harbor goes off perfectly, we have a year. They're already cranked up with industrial production. Like, we're not catching them at a standstill and they have to get up to speed. All they're going to do is stop sending all the shit over to Europe and start directing it to the Pacific. And we have a year to try to get our footing before this all comes down on us.
And then what? We get, you said 66 days?
This mission was Doolittle assigned. 66 days later, bombs are hit in Tokyo. So, to be able to pull that off, and that's got to be the craziest part about this. You have to find the planes that work. You have to modify. And you're not doing this in the same place. You're doing this across the country in different areas. You're training the pilots to be able to do this thing that's never been done before. Then you're having to go ahead and transport the planes and do a little bit more work on them. Like, how it all condenses down into this and how it ends up working. Of course, it doesn't go perfectly to plan. They lose the 16 planes. They lose a couple, guys and everything. But this thing, when it was in kind of its infancy, it was recognized for what it ended up being. It was a near suicidal mission. Yeah. And I'm trying to put myself in the mind of like the pilots that are volunteering for this. They volunteered without knowing what was going on. at several points, Doolittle gives them outs. Nothing, like, no one's going to think less of you. Like, we understand that the things we're asking you to do and, like, the training, it seems pretty like we're going into some dangerous shit. He even asked the guys when they were on the carrier, and he told them they were going to bomb Japan. He's like, any man that wants to step down, he's like, there are people to take your place. And I'm not saying that to try to, like, shame you, but this is the time that you need to step aside if you're not fully committed to this. No one raised their hand. Everyone was like, no, we're in this. Even with that knowledge of being like, is there a more dangerous place for us to fly over right now? Like
Berlin.
That's the only thing I could possibly think of was like, yeah, this would be akin to essentially just being like, yeah, we're going to fly over Berlin in the daytime at 1,500 feet.
Yep.
And hope this goes well.
Drop leaflets.
Yeah.
No defensive mechanisms.
And then try to get into Russia or safety. And like, I don't even know. Like, but to do that in 66 days is nuts. And just, you know, of course, this stuff doesn't really come out, all the details, until after the war and records are unsealed. And so once it happened, it was just like, how did they do it? Like how, and that was the mystery around it. But because you didn't know how they do it and you didn't think it was possible, it's like, oh, we can win this shit.
Yeah.
Like we can now do this. Like if we can bomb Japan and we didn't have any place to take off planes over there, like what can't we do?
Yeah, it's not, I think, is widely recognized as the biggest way that we could have gotten back at Japan, because I think the narrative, and I think we've talked about the narrative too, and it is logical to say that the first part before Midway, Japan was kind of whooping our ass everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't get brought up enough, and we haven't given enough respect, especially, I mean, now that we've done an episode on it, we've respected it enough, but this was what was carrying hopes and dreams while physically we were just down.
I feel it's the first round of a prize fight.
Yeah.
And your opponent comes out and they fucking come out hotter than you. They come out swinging. They hit you with a fucking shot that staggers you and knocks you back against the rope. And you're just sitting there with your gloves up and they're just going to town on you. What the Doolittle Raid was, is he's, you know, going to town and all of a sudden you just catch him right in the jaw with just like a short jab that staggers him backwards a little bit. And all of a sudden he's having to rethink that he's in a fight. And I think that's what this did. And again, it's hard to quantify how much it changed the trajectory, even if it had small little differences here and there. One of the huge, like, after war differences it was used as a prime example about certain types of like litigation for prisoners of war. What's allowed, what's not allowed. What do you have to determine is actually a fair trial? What does the trial have to comprise? All of this stuff was broken down. And essentially all of these holes or loopholes that were able to be found were shored up. So, I mean, even the sacrifice that those guys made, those 3 guys that were executed, the guy that died, you know, in the POW camp, they had huge reverberating effects in how other people taken captive in future wars were treated.
Legacy lives on.
Yep.
Wow.
All right, man. I'm tired of talking.
This is so cool. I love these learning episodes when you can tie into just something and just sink your teeth in, because when you rabbit hole on a certain topic during a war episode, it's one of my favorite parts of the episodes. When you just get to rabbit hole an entire episode in and of itself, it's incredible.
When you get to see the crazy in my eyes.
It's so good.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us this week, and we will catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.